Good morning, Fannin. How are you doing today? So this is the video lesson for Revelation, the first lesson in the series that I started last Sunday, November 1st. Today is Saturday, November 7th, I believe. And so I'm going to put this on YouTube so you can check it out if you want to. We'll have the second lesson tomorrow, the 8th, there at church. So let's get started. When you look at the book of Revelation, of course, especially in these times, a lot of questions, always questions, right? Almost from the beginning when you study this, people had questions. You know, is this something that's going to happen in the future? Excuse me, is this something that's going to happen right now? You know, no different than what we have today. So today I want to lay down some groundwork, some foundational stuff on the book for you to keep in mind throughout the study, and I think it really kind of will push us in a certain direction towards understanding it and being able to maybe apply it a little bit better. So I want to start off, and I just want to read the first three verses of Revelation chapter 1 so that you can we'll be referring back to that a lot today. It says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants the things that must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy." So thanks, I just got some blessings. "And blessed are those who hear." You're welcome. You just got a blessing. "And who keep what is written in it." Once again, for the time is near. So we'll come back to that in just a second, but let's think about a little bit of history first. I know it kind of drives some people crazy, but I think you need to understand the context. So we know this was written by a guy named John. The general assumption has always been it's been John the Apostle. Not everyone agrees with that, but that's been generally accepted by the church, who has been sent to this island Patmos off the coast of Turkey there, or Syria area, as punishment, basically, for being a believer in Christ. So when did he write this? Well, there's discussion, there's disagreement just about a lot of things. Could have been written in the mid to late 60s up into the mid 90s. So quite a spread, 30 years. General thinking is that John the Apostle lived into his 90s, so he could have written this much later. There's a major historical event that occurred in 69 AD where the Romans finally got tired of the Jewish rebellions and just trouble that they'd had, and they had sent an army down and they wiped out the city of Jerusalem. And John never really refers to that in the book of Revelation. But there's really not a reason for him to have referred to that when you read through this book. It's one of those things. He didn't refer to it, but really, he never really talks about. This book is concerned with visions that he receives of events occurring in heaven. So there's not necessarily a reason for him to have talked about it. The letters to the churches in Asia that we'll look at next week, or tomorrow, in the second lesson, there's really not a reason to refer to it there because those are letters that Jesus told him to send, dictated to him to send. So it could have been later, could have been earlier. We really don't know. But nevertheless, the church had been changing. Even if you look at the 60s, Paul's probably dead. Peter's probably dead. A lot of the other apostles are dead. The church has spread from Jerusalem to Syria, that area, to Asia, to Africa. By the time you're even in the 60s, there are churches in Greece, in Rome, possibly even in Spain. So the church is already expanding. And if it's written much later in the 90s, it's definitely expanded. The church is evolving. It's changing. It's not just Jewish, but it's not the way it'll be in a couple of hundred years where it's primarily Gentile. Especially in the Asia area where this letter is kind of focused at. It's probably a good mixture of Jews and Gentiles. And for that reason, it's a great teaching tool if you think about it. As this letter is read aloud in the church, and we'll see this over the next few weeks, be great because you have Jews in there that understand parts of it. that are talked about. For instance, just a quick look, like in the letter to the church in Ephesus. At the very end, God says, for those who stay strong and do what they're supposed to, I will let them eat of the tree of life. Well, of course, now you can imagine the pastor's reading this letter out. You've got Jews in there. You've got Gentiles. The Gentiles might be like, well, what's the letter, the tree of life? What does that mean? Well, let me tell you about Genesis 1, 2, and 3 and how sin came in the world. So it's a really good just teaching tool. And you see that in a lot of ways. So you have this kind of nice balance, although it created tensions, but of Gentiles who don't understand the things of the Bible and at all probably, and Jews who can help teach and work together as a body to teach each other. And this is kind of something to remember, just kind of a point for our times. In many of the arguments that we have, cultural arguments, especially surrounding LGBT movement and some of those things, people will say, well, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality being bad or that homosexual marriage is bad. That was Paul. He wrote a different gospel. Well, you kind of have to think about that because Jesus is very clear in the Gospels that he came to the Jewish people. And Paul is the last of the apostles and a missionary to the Gentile people. Well, when Jesus is talking to the Jews, they have the Ten Commandments. They have the law. And so they don't need to be told that certain things like homosexual marriage, children, all these type of things that were predominant in Roman culture, the Jews don't need to be told that those are bad. They understand God's plan that marriage is between a man and a woman. Sex is to occur between a man and a woman within the confines of the marriage only. Any sex outside of that is sinful, fornication or adultery. But the Jews don't have to be told that. They know it. So Jesus doesn't have to go, well, okay, let me tell you what marriage is. They know it. Now, the Gentiles, a whole different world. In Roman culture, Greek culture, homosexuality was normal. Affairs were normal. Fornication was normal. All this stuff was not just normal. It was just expected, actually, and part of a lot of religious rites. So when Paul's writing to churches in Greece, in Turkey, in Rome, he has to sometimes take the time and say, okay, hold on a second. Let me tell you, these things that you did take part in, that maybe some of you are still taking part in, and you're seeing they are sinful. Why are they sinful? Well, here is God's plan for marriage. Paul would have to go back and do that. So if you run into someone that says that, now this doesn't necessarily mean they're going to believe you, but this is one of the reasons why Paul has to deal with these issues in ways that Jesus didn't. It's not a new gospel. It's just a gospel presented to different people who didn't have the same worldview or background of the Jews. So when you're looking at this letter, this revelation, this letter that goes to the church, we have to remember a few times, we have to always ask ourselves when you look at a letter, what did this mean initially to the people who received it? What did they look like? What kind of situation were they in? Why did God have the writer of the particular letter write things in certain ways, and what would it have meant to them? So you think about these churches there in Turkey were primarily sent. Things were growing, but they were very slow. They were encountering more and more persecution from the Roman government. There was almost a David and Goliath type feel to things. People were getting put in jail. People were getting killed already, and there had to be some feeling of, why aren't things changing? There's a great book called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. And if you look at the early church, from our perspective, a lot of times we'll say, well, it went from, hardly anybody, 120 believers, in the upper room in 33 AD to within 300 years taking over the Roman Empire and it becoming Christian, at least in name and function. But even though that 300 years to us seems rapid, if you're living during that 300 years, especially early on, in the midst of some of that persecution, it probably wasn't that quick. It probably seemed like, is anything going to change? We constantly have problems. We have problems from the Jews. We have problems from the Gentiles. And so, we need to keep that in mind, that this letter is written as positive as, hey guys, you know what? It's going to get tough. It already is tough. It may get tougher, but God's on your side. God will win in the end, and so will you. So, keep these things in mind. That the book of Revelation, it's not an intellectual puzzle for us to solve. That's not what it is at all. Now, are there puzzles in it? Are there things in it? Yeah, we're about to talk about a few of those, and we'll talk about more as we move forward. But it's a letter that was meant to be used, at that time by those people. And there are things that we can draw out of it and we can apply to our day, but we always have to keep that in mind. First, it's not first and foremost that we take everything as some sort of symbolism in this letter and try to apply it to today. That's not the way we do any other book in the Bible. So why should we do this one any different? So it's written in a certain manner for a certain reason. It's written in what's called the apocalyptic style. And, kind of think of it as almost like a code in some ways. And the writer John will use signs in different ways as ways to kind of, their cultural signs or signs the Jews would have known and understood that they could explain to the Gentiles to talk about certain things. So he sees these visions as he's going through these things and he's seeing these fantastic visions. He is going to relate them to people using signs and symbols that they would understand, In other words, when he sees things, he's not thinking in our terminology. He's thinking in their terminology. He couldn't think in our terminology. So we have to be careful when people will take the book of Revelation and say things like, well, you see these flying scorpions with these, that sting people and all those. Well, what those really were helicopters. And John just didn't know what a helicopter was. He described it in his way. Well, why would they be helicopters? That doesn't make sense that they would be helicopters. John saw them for what they were. Now, he described them in a certain way that his people would understand. But once again, that's trying to overlay our version of it onto what really happened. So let's talk about these signs because they're going to crop up in different ways throughout the entire book. And I will have these notes. They will put them online so you can get this and refer back to them. I'm going to kind of go through them, and it may be kind of tough to follow, but they will be on our website, and I'll have them available at the lessons where you can kind of go back. So what do signs do? Well, signs point us to people, places, and things. They point, this is Midland. There's a sign outside. It points. You're entering into Midland County, or you're entering into the city of Midland. Signs 250 miles to Dallas. Turn left to get to here. So, but signs are broken down by John in kind of three different ways. One, there are these things that we're going to call icons. What is an icon? An icon is a sign that communicates by looking like or similar to the object or idea they represent. So what does that mean? Well, think about your computer. If you've got a document you want to get rid of, you click it on the mouse and you drag it down to the thing that looks like a trash can. That's an icon, right? It's not really a trash can, but in our culture, in our time, we look at that and we say, that's a trash can. That's where trash goes. It's just an icon that's similar. I mean, computers are made up of that. The way Windows is designed and the way all these, because they're things that jump out. In a religious term, you think about in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, they have these paintings or engravings of Christ and the apostles, and they are icons that to them, they pray through them to the person of Christ. That's a whole other issue, but it's nevertheless the same thing. And we see that throughout the story of Revelation. We'll see it in the images of Christ. He gives this description of him. His feet were burnished metal. His hair was white. His face was like flame. But, we don't know exactly what that looked like, but we do know it represents the image of Christ. That. Then later on, he describes the beast in a certain way. We don't know exactly what that looked like. Artists can draw us a picture, but it's an icon of what's bad about the beast. So you have these icons that they communicate something by the fact that there's something that they recognize. So when we look at these images, these icons that appear later on, those people in those days would have recognized those. A lot of them come from the book of Daniel. The next thing is what we call indexes. So you have icons are a type of sign. Then you have indexes. These are signs that are evident when worshipers or objects are affected by or changed by an encounter. So think about a weather vane, for those of you who remember. A weather vane isn't changed, but it moves, and what does it tell us? It tells us where the wind is moving. So we can't see the wind, but we can see this weather vane. So it is an object that's affected by something and that tells us about it, right? Think about blood stains at a crime scene. You know, the CSI people are able to go in and look at those blood stains. By themselves, they're just blood stains, but they tell a story about what happened. John uses the same type of thing. When you see the glory of God that changes people. Whenever God's glory is revealed, you see the elders falling down in worship. Later on, you see the people see the beast, people of earth that aren't believers, they're all struck. They want to worship. So these icons bring out these indexes. It gives some sort of thing. And this is going to be very important as we study through. And then the last thing is probably what John uses the most, and that are symbols. Symbols are signs that communicate because given groups have agreed to that arbitrary meaning. Now, this is very important because a lot of the symbols in the book of Revelation are given meaning because the people at that time understood them. Think of a red light. Red, yellow, green. Why does that mean stop, drive faster, and go if you live in Midland? Because nobody stops on a yellow, right? Well, we've all agreed that a red light means I stop. A green light means I get to go. If I'm going on a green light and you run the red light and you hit me, what's the first thing we're all going to say? Is your fault because you ran the red light. You bring someone else from another culture that doesn't know about it, they don't know what those lights mean. We have stuff like this all over the place. We have to have this, right? We've got to understand these things. Culture cannot work without these symbols that we all understand. So what are some symbols that we see? We're going to talk about a lot of them. But one is over in Revelation 4:3, there's a rainbow encircling the throne of God. That does not mean God is an LGBT supporter. No. It refers back to the book of Genesis and the promise that God made to Noah. It's a sign of the covenant. So once again, it's a symbol, right, of God's grace and God's promise not to destroy the world through a flood. And it's also a great teaching tool. If you think about it, once again, this guy's reading the letter. He gets to Genesis 4:3. You got Gentiles in there. You got Jews in there. He tells about this. Maybe somebody goes, hey, what's the rainbow over God's throne mean? Oh, well, let me tell you a story about Noah. So great teaching tool, great symbol once people begin to understand that. You know, you get simple things like great multitude in heaven before the Lamb, robed in white and with palm branches over in Revelation 7:3. Well, that has great meaning in a Roman culture. And we're going to get into that later. So you have these indexes, you have symbols, and you have icons that all have meaning in the book of Revelation directly to those people at that time who heard this letter. Now, does that mean we can't understand those? No, it doesn't. Does that mean that some of them might not have meaning now? No, it doesn't. They may have meaning now, but we need to first interpret them and think about them as how they would have had meaning to those people listening. So like I said, the book has to be meaningful to these readers, first and foremost. Otherwise, it doesn't serve its purpose, right? Because it is talking to those 7 churches. Matter of fact, in verse 4, John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, from the 7 spirits that are before the throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead and the ruler of kings on earth. You know, it has to have meaning. It does have meaning. So what we're going to get is a series of visionary experiences that John is going to have, that he's going to narrate to us. They're about God's kingdom. They're about judgment on the enemies and vindication of the followers. That is the final result of what this is. So it brings confidence to the believers back then and to us if we're in persecution. That is the goal of the book of Revelation, to remind any reader that God is in control, that even though worldly powers may seem greater than anything than we think anything can overcome, that they may be crushing every ideal and everything that we have, nevertheless, the book of Revelation tells them, anybody who's read it since then, and us, and anyone who may come in the future, that yes, this is going to happen. There may be hard times. You may have to live through them, but in the end, God's kingdom will win and God's kingdom will conquer. And we need to keep that in mind, that is what first and foremost that was to communicate to them and also to us. Right? And the early reader would have understood these symbols, that they were symbols of certain reality. They would have looked at, like two quick examples. Talks about later on, you have this bear, this creature that's got parts of it that are a bear, a creature that's parts of it that look like an eagle. Well, those are symbols to them. Sometimes I've heard modern interpreters say things like, well, the bear probably stands for Russia and the eagle for America. Well, what sense would that have made to them back then? They didn't know Russia or America. No, the bear stood for Persia. You get that from the book of Daniel. And the eagle stood for Rome. You get that from the book of Daniel, right? I mean, all you had to do is look around and you saw eagles all over. Every Roman legion carried an eagle. That was their symbol. And, as you see these things kind of working out, you just have to keep these in mind. So why would John write it that way? Well, God told him to, but there are two kind of reasons. Number one, secrecy and teaching, or teaching and secrecy. So let's talk about teaching first. Well, number one, like I said, these letters would be read out in a church and to certain people. And throughout the book of Revelation, John refers to the Old Testament over 150 times. So when it's been read out loud, you think about the teaching opportunities. Great teaching opportunity. I mean, I've just told you a couple. There's hundreds of them throughout there. There's references to New Testament writings in the book of Revelation. So it's a great teaching tool. Really, even if you look at it now, if you don't get caught up in some of the craziness of the visions, there's great teaching within there and how to go about it. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we go through these lesson, that this is written as a teaching tool. So, secrecy. Well, let me pull up a couple of verses, because there was a sense of needing to keep things kind of secret. Now, certain things that you were in there that they didn't have to worry about people understanding, but they did want to keep some things secret. So, how do we refer it? So, you look back at verse 3, where it says that I'm speaking to you about things that are about to happen. Well, you go over to what's the code for that to begin to understand that, because there has to be some sort of code that these guys would have understood. Oh, he said things that are about to happen, that are near at hand. Well, we go back to Daniel, because that's always kind of the code for these apocalyptic type books. Over in Daniel 2:28 gives us kind of the legend for that, because Daniel says this. He says, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. So if you remember the story over in Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar has this vision, and no one can tell him what it is. And he says, I want all my magicians and wizards to come, and I want someone to not only tell me what this vision means, but I'm not going to tell you what the vision was. You have to tell me what the vision was and what it means. Well, no one can do that. So Nebuchadnezzar is going to have everyone put to death because they can't. Well, Daniel's one of these, kind of wizard type dream readers. And they come to get Daniel, and he's like, why are you taking me to kill me? I didn't do anything. And they're like, well, the king said we got to kill you because no one can tell him what his vision is. And Daniel's like, well, nobody even asked me. Let me go. I can do it. God can do it. So Daniel goes. God gives him the vision, and he tells him what it means. It's this vision of the statue of these empires that are to come. And we're going to get into this a lot more. And Daniel tells him what the vision was and what it meant. And he says that all this stuff will occur in the latter days. In other words, not right then, but a long time from now. Because this statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about had different parts making up the statue. Each part reflected an empire that was to come. The Chaldeans, the Persians, the Greeks, and finally the Romans. But fast forward to the book of Revelation, that all those empires have now come. And now it's for the final one. You look at that thing and you see that this great rock is going to come and smash all these things. So in John 3, when people read this and they say, the time is here, it's near at hand, they're going to go back and they're going to say, oh, okay, I see what you say. And what's going to take place? Well, in Daniel 2, 44 through 45, we kind of see the beginning of what's going to take place. And in the days of those kings, in other words, the Romans, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break into pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from the mountain by no human hand, and that it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God is made known to the king. What shall be after this? The dream is certain, and its interpretation true. So Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar, the last thing you saw was this rock that was not made by human hands that came and destroyed this statue that he dreamed about that reflected all the empires that were to come. That's what's about to happen. All right? The church is growing. It is going to begin to take over the kingdom of man. Is it going to take over all of it? No, it isn't. There are still pieces of the world that has. But what John is saying is the times are at hand. Just like Daniel said, what times? Well, the time where the kingdom. And you look at it when John wrote this letter, the church is there. It's in this nucleus form, but it's starting to grow out. It's starting to expand. And within 300 years, it's going to take over Rome and stay a power throughout the world. And no matter what happens, it's like a whack-a-mole. You hit it over here, and the church pops up over here. Hit it there, it pops up here. It's always there. It's always powerful. God always has his remnant. So this is kind of that first thing that you pick up, right? And you need to keep in mind, what's going to be talked about in this book is something that's about to happen to these churches. Now, not to get too deep into this rabbit hole, but does it have meaning for us today? Yes, it could. We're going to talk about that more. There are things in here that have meaning to us today, but first they had to have meaning to them at that time, and you need to understand that. I want to give you a couple of quick things. You'll have to look this up online because I don't have the ability to show you here. But in Revelation 1:7, it tells us that John sees Jesus coming in glory on the clouds. Okay? Well, one of the popular symbols back then, it's actually on a coin, an Emperor Domitian, 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 had a son who died when he was young, and Domitian had a coin made that showed his son sitting on the globe, on the world, with all these stars around him. And the legend had it was that his son, Domitian, made him into God because the Roman emperors were considered gods, and that this son would come back on the clouds like Apollo. So, look at Revelation 1:7. How does John see Jesus coming in all of his glory on the clouds? So when he gives this description, these people know about this coin. Somebody may even had it in the pocket of their toga and looked at it. They might have pulled it out and say, look at this. This is a false god who supposedly is going to do this. This is what the real God's going to look like. So great teaching tool. Go look at Revelation 1:7. Find a picture of that coin and see the difference. Here comes God. Here comes Jesus back to claim his empire, his throne, not some little baby that his dad was sad that he died, and so he made him into a god. Another coin that was very popular back then that talks about over later on in the book of Revelation was a coin with the goddess Roma on 7 hills. Now, later on it will talk about the harlot sitting on these 7 hills. A lot of people try to stretch. Is it Babylon? Is it Rome? Is it this city? Is it New York City? Is it Los Angeles? No, it was Rome. Rome is built on 7 hills. Once again, look at the coin. Go find it. It's the goddess Roma on the 7 hills. A coin probably somebody, once again, would have had in that church. So when they get to that part later on in the book of Revelation, they're going to know he's talking about Rome. Why is Rome bad? Not because of the Pope, not because of the Catholic Church, but because Rome was a seat of emperor worship, which is why they were being persecuted. So it's these symbols that are there, these things that they will see and they will understand. We start trying to read too many things into them, we lose track of the basic meaning. So, you had these things that meant stuff here and there, yes. And we'll talk about this more next week, but I don't want you to walk away confused. There are things that we can take out that are meanings. So you look at the letter to the church in Laodicea that we'll look at in more detail next week. Within that letter, it talks about not being lukewarm. That if you are, that Jesus is going to spew you out of his mouth. Okay. What did that mean to them? Well, in one sense, it meant a little bit more to them because the city of Laodicea received water that had to be piped either from hot springs or from winter cold snow water. But by the time it got to that city, it was lukewarm and not good water. Matter of fact, they made a specific purgative out of it that they sold that made people throw up. So when God says this in this letter, when we get this letter from Jesus, when they get it, they understand exactly what that means. And they're not to be like that in their Christianity. The letter accuses them of being like that. Well, that is a very vivid meaning to them. But does that mean it only meant something to them? No, it doesn't mean. We know what lukewarm means. We understand that. Now, it may not have ever made us throw up, but, on a hot day when you've been working outside, you want cold water. You don't want something lukewarm. Now, you might drink it, but it's not what you want, right? And so, yes, it does have meaning to us. The idea of a lukewarm Christian has the same meaning now that it did then. Nevertheless, there were things in that letter that specifically they understood that we'll talk about more that we wouldn't understand as much, but we would still understand. So there's tons of stuff like that. We're going to work our way through it over the next few weeks. This is just kind of an introduction. So main points to keep in mind are that there are signs and indexes and icons. Symbols, indexes, and icons. These are signs that God has John use as he's writing this letter that very much, first and foremost, meant stuff to those people back then. Some of them have meaning to us. Some of them may carry over to our future and maybe even to our time. We don't know. But we first need to look and see what did it mean to them. This Sunday, we're going to go over the letters to the specific churches and talk about, what did it mean then? What can it mean to us? Because there are meanings there. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email, shoot me a text. We should have some notes on some of this stuff on the website next week. You have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow.